Here we go. Going live from the truck. Pond Boss Magazine. Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you live from a parking lot right in the middle of pecan plantation over here. Matter of fact, I had to find a place where there's a light because it's so darn dark. So tonight I thought I'd be chit-chatting, talking a little bit about fish behavior. I think that'd be a fun topic. So I don't have internet for my laptop, so I'm going to track questions on my phone. I see Stephen Stupa, Justin Shink. Good to see you guys. I see 11 people are watching here. So Todd Austin, I see Todd. John Funk from mid-Michigan. Troy Todd. Troy's got it. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. You guys know the drill. Wesley Ellis. Good to see you, brother. Frank James checking in from Houghton, Louisiana. You got some rain coming at you if it hadn't hit you yet. It's coming. Kenny Sanderson. Hey, Kenny from Kansas. How you doing, buddy? Good to see you. You guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Hi, Danny Mack. Good to see you, Billy Bates. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like and share this to your timeline and tag some friends that you think could benefit from these discussions. Nick Kajewski. Hey, Nick, I got your email today. I'm going to reply to it when I get a chance. I got to drive. Did you get that big storm moving? Yeah, it cranked up right here. Started kind of firing up here. It's a big, long storm. Hi, David George. Good to see you. So I thought today, I read an article that was posted on the Bassmasters Facebook page today that talked about fish behavior. And I thought I would start the topics tonight to talk about fish behavior with the things that I know. Hello, Kim Moore. So I've been fortunate enough to have been involved in some fish movement studies. And then I've got some anecdotal things too. David George, glad you got it. Hey, Michael Gray, man, I got tied up on a Zoom call today. I'm on the External Advisory Committee for the Range, Wildlife, and Fisheries Management Department, which is a brand new department that's merged. Hello, Vito. I know what El Jefe means. I know what Ola means, but I don't know what Estink means. But I think I like it when I look it up. Tom Davis, good to see you. So, anyway, I'm on the External Advisory Committee as they begin to put together. And, hey, I see Josie texting me. She's driving to the property but listening to me. Hey, that's a good deal. Wednesday night date on the road. That's fall. That's fun. Hello, Travis. Good to see you. So, anyway, they're building a brand new department. So they're changing up the curricula, trying to be pond management friendly. So they're going to actually have a degree in aquaculture and fisheries management that includes pond management. They're going to have a degree in aquatic plant management too. Or maybe it's a certificate in aquatic plant management. But anyway, I know that they're going to tack a whole bunch of those things on at Texas A&M University. I'm pretty excited about that. See Fred Bingaman checking in. Katie Baca is checking in. I figured you'd be fishing, but no, wait, it's dark. You know, I read something kind of funny. I think it's funny. It was posted as represented by Native Americans saying only the white man would cut 2 inches off of the blanket and sew it to the other end of the blanket, thinking it's a longer blanket. Daylight savings time. Hi, James Allen. Good to see you, buddy. Micah Terrell. Good to see Mike from Palapena County. My dinner date last week was really good. My son and daughter-in-law belong to a family club that's got a really nice restaurant that sits beside a pond, so we got to go hang out and do that. Doug Cusick, good to see you. Tom Davis is from Ohio, so we got the whole nation represented. We got Illinois, Fred Bingaman. We got Louisiana. We have Texas, Michigan, California. Looks like Carolinas. So let's talk about this stuff. I want to start off with fish behavior. But if you guys have questions, bring them to me and we're going to talk about it. Speaking of Carolinas, there's Mike Cook. David George from Iowa. That's super. I love it. The article that I read today was talking about fish caught at tournaments, kept alive, and it was posted or actually shared by Gene Gilliland, who I went to A&M with and has been a long-time colleague and friend of mine. He worked for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation as a fisheries biologist for a long, long time. And then after he retired, he went to work for Bassmasters, and part of his job is to preserve fish that are caught, keep them alive, keep them healthy, and then help oversee their release back into the lake. Well, there's an article coming out where they're thinking that by catching these fish in certain areas of the lake and then releasing them in other areas of the lake could be detrimental to recruitment. Now, I didn't get to read the article, but I do understand a little bit about fish behavior and fish movement. Hello, Sean Duncan. Good to see you. Glad you're joining us tonight. I got to be involved in a study, 5 years ago, where about 40 largemouth bass were tagged with telemetry tags, to where the fish were electrofished, captured, surgically opened, stitched up with a tag that's about as big as your thumb, put into their gut cavity, stitched them up, treated the wound, and then released the fish, and then tracked their movements. And I'm going to come at you two ways. I'm talking about the scientific study, and then I'm going to tell you some anecdotal things that I've seen in the past. It's really fascinating to me about fish behavior. So of those 40 fish, there was a few of those 40 fish that were like long distance runners, marathon runners. They would move 2 to 3 miles. Now, this was a 125 acre lake that's shaped it's long and narrow with a couple of coves and a long ancient creek bed built in 1952 in East Texas where this lake is. So what would happen is there was a graduate student that lived on site for 18 months. This was part of his master's degree. And he tracked these fish. So each tag's got a number, and they can track it by which tag it is. They know which fish it is. And there was one fish in particular that moved over 2 miles every day. But these are largemouth bass, by the way. But there was no rhyme or rhythm to it. I would think that if a bass moved that much, it's kind of got a trap line it runs, Go to this brush pile, eat. Go to that brush pile, eat. Go over here to this cut, eat. Go over here, eat, whatever. I would think it would be triggered by hunger and the chase. But it wasn't like that. That fish was random. It might move a quarter of a mile and sit for 2 hours, then move half a mile and sit. And it was random. Every time he tracked the movement of that fish, it was totally different. Then there was another. Now, that fish weighed about 5 pounds. There was another, and these were all fish, I think, over 2.5 pounds. So there was one fish in this 125 acre lake that never left an area as big as a football field. It stayed right there. And even when they electrofished that fish twice, that fish came right back to that same spot every time. So, as a matter of fact, when we were tagging those fish, I was involved in electrofishing the early part of this study. We electrofished a fish, caught it. It weighed about 5.5 or 6 pounds. We loaded it up, drove in the boat straight back to the dock to pass it off to the surgery crew so they could put a tag in it. And then we went back and kept shocking. And by the time we circled back to that same spot was about an hour and a half after that fish had been released from the dock. Okay, and the dock, a pretty good distance away, half a mile probably, 700 yards to somewhere, probably right around half a mile is where that fish was released after it was implanted with that tag. And it was probably hour and a half or 2 hours after the fish had been released, we decided to circle back to that same spot. We shocked up another 5.5 pound bass in the very same spot that fish was. And when the guys picked it up with the net and swung it around, I stopped the boat and looked at it. It was that fish. So that fish had gotten a tag in it and then went straight back to its home 20. So I'm going to tell you this, largemouth bass do prefer to have a home territory. Now, the other 40 of those fish, their movement wasn't nearly as random. It was a little bit more predictable, and most of them did seem to have a home territory where they would range. And it might be an area as big as 5 acres. It could be 10 acres. It could be as small as one, as that one with a football field, 1 acre. And there's one particular brush pile where that fish stayed all the whole time. Another thing that was very interesting to me was almost every one of these fish in the summer, this lake, the water temperature at the surface would get into the low 90s. And then you go down, the lake thermocline sat usually like at 9 feet or 10 feet. Deepest water in the lake was 26 feet. But at the thermocline, the water temperature dropped into the low 80s and upper 70s. But the thermocline was only about 10 or 12 inches thick. And at the bottom of the thermocline, oxygen was 0. Halfway up it, it was about 3 parts per million. At the top of the thermocline, about 5 or 6 parts per million. The rest of the lake was at about 85% saturation for whatever that temperature is, which say it hovered around 6 to 7 parts per million. So at the top of the thermocline, all the way to the surface of the lake, the temperature was hotter, but the oxygen was a lot warmer. I mean, a lot higher as well. Billy Bates, thanks for the Solitude Lake Management recommendation for my Maryland pond. I asked them to find some big red ear. Good. That's good. Let's see what else this says. And I'll come back to that story because it's pretty interesting. Since I've established pond with predators, they stocked some monsters for me 2 weeks ago, along with some decent. I'm so glad to hear that. Congratulations. That's good. I love it when a good plan comes together and a good company provides a great service. That's good. So anyway, what we've learned from that study was in the summertime, the bass would feed maybe once a day, and they all fed at different times of the day. But in the heat of the day, almost every single one of them had their noses in the thermocline. And what the conclusion was as long as they had enough oxygen that they didn't suffocate, they'd stay there because they were looking for the best temperature. So my take-home point there was bass and most warm water fish need a thermal refuge. And that's a big deal. I see Matthew Key, Mike Bennett. Good to see you guys. Let me see what we got going on here. Sean Peters, Rick McGuire, Chris Arthur, Tony Edwards, Ian Swinger, Justin Ludwig. Good to see all you folks checking in. So what was so cool about that is that most of those bass did have a home area. And we could capture them and release them, and they would go back to that home area. But there were those random few that were transients. They would just be rolling all over the lake with no rhyme or reason, nothing predictable. And then, of course, there was that one or two that never left an area any bigger than a football field. So as I was growing into this fisheries business, one of the things that was pounded into my mind, actually right here, I'm sitting a stone's throw from Lake Granbury, and I'm in Pecan Plantation where we're trying to live. If we can get that damn house finished. And the river winds all the way around. But I remember when I was in the 9th grade back in 1969, I was 14 years old. A cagey old catfish fisherman made a comment to me that just kind of burned into my mind. And to this day, I think about that. He told me, I've told this story before, so some of you have heard it, but what he said was it was an old man, and you know him, khaki overalls, bib overalls with a khaki shirt, tobacco stain from his red man, and he was dragging a John boat across a sandbar, and my dad, we pulled up. We were driving around in what was about to become the basin of Lake Granbury, which is an 8,300-acre lake. That was the month, August of 1969, when they closed the gates to fill this lake right here. It's just right over there. And so he was upset. I remember he was giving my dad, just pointing his finger. He was mad at the government because he'd fished that river his entire life, and now they were going to take it away from him and turn it into a lake, and he didn't like it. But then all of a sudden, in mid-sentence, he just turned around, pointed his finger at me. He said, "Son, I'm going to tell you something. 90% of the fish live in about 10% of this river. And if you can figure out which 10% that is, you're going to catch a lot more fish." Well, I don't know why, but that stuck in my mind, and I believed it. And after 40 plus years of managing lakes, I still believe that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, every time, when we're in the electrofishing boat, we come across, we might go 100 yards and not get a fish. And all of a sudden, bam, 7 or 8 or 10 pop up. And we'll snag them with the nets, put them in the live well so they can revive, then keep going. And then bam, in a minute, here's some more. And it's not like it's random. Those fish are choosing based on instinct and conditioning. Their behavior is centered around instinct and conditioning. The instinct comes from what they're born with. Fight or flight, eat, reproduce. That's it. That's pretty much what their instinct is. Fight or flight. If they're going to fight, they're going to eat you. That they don't get into a bar fight. They don't throw stones. They don't hit people upside the head with bar stools, or crack beer bottles over people's head. If they're going to fight, they're going to eat whatever they're trying to fight. If the other one, fits in its mouth. And that's really the only qualification. It's got to fit in its mouth. And then they condition. And what's really interesting to me is they condition to that environment from the time they're little bitty fish. So the take-home point here is you are not going to take a 7 or 8 year old bass that grew up in that environment and move it to that environment and expect it to thrive. They don't have the ability to think. They can't reason. It's instinct and conditioning. If they're conditioned to that environment and you put them in that environment, odds are not in their favor. Now, I'm not going to tell you that a 5-pound bass you catch at Lake Fork by legal means and you go put it in your lake that isn't going to thrive. I'm not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you the biggest percentage of them will not. So I'm going to tell you 7 out of 10 will not thrive. 3 out of 10 will, if they've got everything they need, which is habitat, food, the kind of food for the size they are, and good, happy water. And those 3 things or 4 things got to come together for that fish to make that adjustment. And I don't like using the word mentality because that insinuates they can think, which they can't. Now, what I've also noticed is as I've grown up in this business, there was a number of lakes that I would electrofish every fall. And I could go over the same spot every fall and shock up the same fish. And to this day, that still happens with several clients. I can go, matter of fact, not far from here, about 60 miles from here near Hyco, about a 15-acre lake there. Hey, Josh, Stubborn Dick, good to see you, brother. I haven't met you, haven't heard of you. Glad you're here. Welcome aboard. If you got questions, bring them here. We'll talk about it. Philip Benefield, thanks for being online even when you're not home. Heck yeah. It's I really like doing this. It's fun because it's energizing to me, and it's helps keep my brain rolling. Plus, you guys ask some great questions that make me think. And he gives me some ideas for Pond Boss Magazine, which, by the way, holy cow, here it is, Pond Boss, right there. I got one on the dashboard. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date. It was cheaper than my Wednesday night date last week, but I didn't pay for that one. I could have bought a subscription to Pond Boss. And actually, I'm wrapping up the January-February issue right now. It's going to be one of the best. It's got some really, really good articles, practical, hands-on, applied science, good anecdotes, lake renovation. I'm going to talk about that. 4th part, and building Lake Deanna's coming up. It's a 6-part series. But anyway, where I was going is I can't tell you how many times I would shock a lake and say, you know what? I can't wait to see how much this bass grew, knowing that when we tickled it with those electrodes, that electrofishing boat, that booger would roll over, and I know. I mean, you could see that fish. It had whatever lake this is. It had the same markings. You could measure the length, measure the weight. The proportions were the same. It was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, there's some lakes where I remember, one of the ways I began to learn the take-home point I gave you a while ago about some fish don't make the transition. I've told this story, but I'm going to tell a piece of it again. There was a guy way back in like 1991 that bought a ranch in south central Texas, put a 9-acre lake on it, and he was in his mid-70s, and he said, son, I don't even buy green bananas. I don't know if I'm going to be here when they get ripe. I don't want to stock this lake with fairling fish. Stock big ones. Well, it's going to cost a lot of money. I don't care, son. Don't worry about the mule going blind. Load the wagon. Well, we ended up stocking some bass where there was an 11.5 pounder, 11 pounds, 7 ounces, and one that was about 12 pounds that we stocked in that lake. And I came back and electrofished it 2 years. The 12 pounder in the first year grew to 10. In the second year, it grew to 8. In the third year, I didn't see it. It was gone. The 10 pounder, I was able to capture it once. It had gone from, 11.7 to 10 pounds in 1 year. I didn't see it after that. So kind of crazy. So fish, especially big fish like that, it's hard to make them make a transition. Let's see, Dave Weber's asking a question. Okay, now I got to figure out how to make this. Hold up. Here it comes. Mike McPherson, Indiana, stocked his pond last Monday. Everything looking great. Dave Weber, please expand on the refuge areas and designing a new pond. I love that. Great question. You bet. I'm going to back up here and make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so now, Wesley Ellis says, in a small 1 or 2 acre pond, do the bass stay in the same area or roam around the whole thing? I'm going to tell you this, Wesley. In a small 1 or 2 acre pond, the bass have a tendency to want to move around. And they're going to go to the areas of refuge, which Dave Weber brought that up. I'm going to talk about that. And their nature, in a 1 or 2 acre pond, you're only going to have somewhere between 60 and 150 adult bass meaning 12 inches or bigger. And they're going to want to defend the bigger fish will defend the best territories, and typically they're going to want to feed by ambush. But in a 1 or 2 acre pond, they're going to move over the whole thing. And so all the more reason to have 30% or so of that pond with some kind of habitat. And habitat meaning spawning beds, dense areas for small bait fish to hide adjacent to the spawning beds, and then some more structure with airspace, like the canopy of a tree with all the little bitty limbs cut off, rock piles, drop-offs, bluffs, cliffs, humps, things like that. They're going to orient to that. So now going back to the refuge concept, and my big deal now is I spend most of my time designing new lakes for people. I think I've got 15 brand new lakes, which is the perfect number for old Bob to do, in different stages, from pre-planning to earth moving to finishing up habitat to putting the first fish in this fall because there's water in it. And so when I'm thinking about refuges, I'll tell you exactly what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking more for refuges for largemouth bass than any other fish, because they're the ones that require it more than any other fish. Bluegills, they don't care that it's hot and they don't care that it's cold. Largemouth bass, their nature is to seek their best temperature if they can. Now, I'm not saying bluegill won't do that. Bluegill will do it, but not to the extreme that a largemouth bass will. So when I'm designing a lake, as a matter of fact, I'm thinking of one right now. I'm going to just kind of walk you through it. This lake is a pretty good sized lake, like 70 acres. And there's one area of the lake where the earth mover was going to make it shaped like a bowl. We met, but as he was getting ready to move the dirt, and I said, you know what, let's don't do that. Let's get out where the water's 6 feet deep at a 3-to-1 slope, and then there create a bluff going down as deep as you want to go to get the good dirt you need, the clay you need to help build this dam. And that's what he did. Now, the reason I picked 6 feet, if somebody happens to be wading out there fishing, I don't want them to be in 4 feet of water and then step into a drop-off where they drop down to 20 feet deep and drown. But if they walk out and they're 6 feet deep, then they step off the ledge, they deserve to drown. Oh, no, I didn't really say that. I don't mean that. But I thought about that as a safety precaution. Now, what we did with that cliff, we brought some big oak trees that had to come out of the basin of that lake to build the dam. And these trees I'm talking about, they were 24 to 30 inches in diameter, shaped, they're curved, and we cut all the small limbs off the canopy, but the canopy was still intact with large limbs, and we pushed about 10 of those over the edge of that cliff where they were at about a 45-degree angle going all the way to the bottom of the lake. So there, and I knew the guy was going to build a waterfall right around the corner from there. So what I suggested to him is that you pick the water up off the bottom under these trees and then drop it over your waterfall and help circulate the water a little bit. And you're going to create a little bit of a thermal refuge right there. You know, because the thermocline is still going to stay intact. So he did that. And in essence, what that did was it gave those bass, big bass, the perfect spot to where in the summertime they could migrate along these logs vertically as the logs angled. So they're going down, and when they got down into that and get down into that good temperature zone, they can stay there and they can orient to that structure. So the bottom line is I put some structure that penetrates the thermocline to give fish something they could orient to. And good anglers in the summertime that know that lake can go catch a pretty good sized bass off those trees almost every time. So there's my answer about the refuge. Okay, let's see here. All right, Jeff Wallen, let's see what you got. Enjoying the show, Central Illinois, what depth, temperature, area will fish hang out in wintertime? Pond is aerated in 3 spots. I'll tell you what I would do in Illinois. I would turn the aerators off. Now, if you and your management team decide you want to run them, pull them closer to the shore. Because what you don't want is you don't want to overly cool your deeper water. Now, remember, water at 39 degrees is the densest it can be. So what happens is as the lake freezes, that surface temperature drops. And as the surface temperature drops and it hits 32 degrees, it's going to freeze. So in central Illinois, Mowequa, wherever you are, you're going to get a layer of ice that's going to be, 6 inches, 7 inches thick, sitting on top of water that's warmer than the ice, or it would be ice. Think about that. So the bottom of that pond, Jeff, is going to be where your fish are going to be hanging out, as long as they've got adequate oxygen. And since you aerate, and you've aerated it all summer, you've probably set the stage, very likely set the stage to have plenty of oxygen through the whole winter months. And so I would consider turning the aeration system off so you can ice fish. But if you want to run it, pull your diffusers away from the deepest part of the water so you're not circulating your warm water, which it's going to be 40 degrees. You check under the ice, drop a thermometer down there, and on the bottom it'll be 40 degrees. Just watch. And that's what it will be. And that's where your fish are going to want to congregate. So when I'm designing an ice fishing lake, like in Iowa or somewhere like that, then we always talk about creating the best kind of habitat on the bottom for ice fishing to help congregate the fish so they're a little bit easier to find, so you can catch them a little bit easier. So, and now another thing to think about, if you want to keep your aeration system going, you might just leave one diffuser on in fairly shallow water. Shallow meaning, I think diffusers work, they stop becoming efficient at about 4 feet or 5 feet deep. So I'd pick a spot maybe 6 feet deep, close to the shore, if you want to keep a hole open and keep the aeration going. So that's my response to that one. Here we go. Frank James, I stocked 70 hybrid strappers in 2017. Caught some up to 6 or 7 pounds. Had a couple so big we couldn't stop them. Let's see here. Given that in my 7-acre pond with a fair number of 18-inch plus largemouth bass, would stocking gizzard shad be worth a risk worth taking? Do big hybrid strappers help control the gizzards? Big hybrid strappers, yes, they do help control gizzard shad. If you've got, here, I'll tell you this. Every single trophy largemouth bass lake that I've managed to try to grow trophy largemouth bass ends up with gizzard shad stocked. Now, here's my logic. As a bass gets bigger, its food requirements grow larger, and it's good to diversify with some fish that will actually live through the wintertime and give them wintertime food. Now, here's the caveat. Gizzard shad can be 2 pounds in 18 months. So you got to have enough bass with big enough mouths to eat a 10 or 11 or 12-inch gizzard shad, or you're going to end up with too many shad. So timing of stocking gizzard shad is real important. And since you stocked your lake in 2017, you're 4 years in, you've probably got enough. The magic number to me is for a bass to be 17 and a half inches long, knocking on the door of 3 pounds. Those are big enough to eat 9, 10, 11-inch gizzard shad. So I would say yes on that. Yes and yes. But you guys that don't have, and my general rule is 25% of the mass of bass, 3 pounds and bigger, then we'll stock gizzard shad. All right, let's see what he's saying. Also, your Habitat article mentioned that natural trees last a lot longer when they're sunk upright rather than laying on their side. Why is this? Because what happens is when most people put trees in the lake, they put Christmas trees or cedar trees, something like that are softwoods. When they lay flat on the ground, they lose their needles just within a year or less. Actually, it takes less time than that. The little bitty twigs are gone by the end of year 2. The medium-sized twigs are gone by about year 3.5 or 4. And by the time you get to year 5, 6, 7, 8 through there, the tree has collapsed on itself, and most of the time it's sunk into the mud. But if you stand it up, it's still going to have some standing mass vertically. That's the key there. That's the key. You want some vertical mass for a fish to be attracted to, for it to last longer. So now, with hardwood trees, that equation changes a little bit, especially if you've got mass. If you've got a hardwood tree with some big limbs, when I say big limbs, I'm going to say 2 inches or bigger. If you've got 2-inch limbs or bigger, that mass is going to stay intact a lot longer. Plus, the trunk of the tree works to harbor larger bass. So there's my answer to that one. Billy Bates. Let's see here, Billy. What's your feeling about Mississippi grass shrimp? I think I want to stock some in the spring, summer. I guess I need to wait until some of the grasses to grow in order to establish them. Here's my answer. I don't have any feelings about Mississippi grass shrimp other than if you can do it, do it. If they're, and where you are, they're going to be native. And if you can capture some of those and make sure they have the habitat they need and the food chain they need, they're going to thrive, and they'll give you some value-added forage fish. And I'm all over diversity. I love that. I'm all for stocking something that adds to the population rather than detracts. And there's not a thing about grass shrimp that detracts from a fishery. Not one thing. Now, here's your take-home point, everybody. The take-home point is that if you don't supply what that creature needs to be able to reproduce, to eat, to be safe from being eaten too quickly, so they can establish. In other words, you need to learn about that animal and provide everything that it needs. Or that insect. I think a shrimp's more like an insect than an animal, it's an animal. But I would be all for doing that. So I'd say, yeah, sure. Do it. Just be sure that they love, and whenever you catch them, if you're going to go catch them, you're going to catch them in a creek where they're grazing on grasses. That's what you're going to get. So that's going to be their food and their habitat to be safe, and areas where they can have babies and the babies can survive in similar habitat circumstances. So duplicate that same habitat. Okay, so Frank James stocked 1,000 of them a few years ago. We haven't seen one lately, but my pond is low alkalinity. Yeah, you know what? In grass shrimp, it's real important because their exoskeleton has got to be made of calcium carbonate, so they got to have lime. So your alkalinity's got to have some merit to it. Bradley Claus, good to see you. Mike McPherson. Let's see here. So Billy Bates and Frank James are going back and forth on that. Hunter Magnus. Tina Rudloff. Hi, Tina. So let's see here. Leo Gripshover. Harrison Davis checking in from Georgia. Ryan Triple. I have been researching DIY floating island project. Assuming I can pull it off without it sinking, any suggestions for what to plant in southern Illinois? I'm going to presume that the mission for your floating island is to add some vertical landscape to the pond. I'm going to also presume that you want roots to go down into the water to give substrate for periphyton and places for insects to grow. So what I would tell you is anything that works in hydroponic situations will work on a floating island. Now, I have planted everything from St. Augustine grass to tomatoes to mint, Louisiana irises. Good gosh, I've planted other vegetables besides tomatoes. And I tell you what has really, really thrived on on my floating islands that I had at LL, 2 were the Louisiana irises. They thrived in the mint, and they would send roots down. Now, my catch-22 is I had 3 grass carp and a half-acre pond, and so they kept the vegetation trimmed, but they also kept the roots trimmed, But anything that will grow in a hydroponic situation will grow in an island. All right, let's see. There's Doug Ryan watching. Chance Birch, hey, Bob, go Bulldogs. Well, you know what? If things come together, if Auburn can beat Alabama, my Aggies might be playing your Bulldogs. That'd be kind of fun. Ryan Triple, help absorb. Okay, you want to absorb nutrients from runoff root systems for fish structure and shade. Don't count on it. Don't count on those plants to reduce the nutrient load much, but they're going to take advantage of it. If you have nutrients, they're going to take advantage of that. Now, don't count on floating islands in a recreational pond to do an adequate job of reducing nutrients. So in other words, if you got a floating island, you're still going to get bushy pondweed. You're still going to get other types of aquatic plants that are going to want to use the nutrients, especially those that are bound in the soil. But still, it's a good stewardship tool, and on the DIY, you guys read the article that I wrote, or actually I didn't write that one. Oh Lord, PhD buddy of mine, Bob. God dang it, I can't think of his name right offhand. Anyway, he's the one that wrote that story that was in the issue a couple of issues ago, and then of course, Floating Islands International. Those guys, Bruce Kanya and his team have done a huge amount of research on that. And they figure it takes that a ton of aquatic plants will take up about 1 to 3 pounds of phosphorus. That's it. So I see, let's see who we got here. Chuck Brinkman. Good to see Chuck from Missouri. JP Clayton. Good to see JP. So, anyway, hey, I'm going to pause for a minute. Let's do a commercial. What time is it? I'm losing track. Okay. Oh, there's a clock. 7:08. Okay. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like. Share to your timeline. You'll be eligible for a drawing for a hat. A Pond Boss hat. There's one right there. A real one. And a mug that I don't have in my truck. I traded trucks. This is kind of interesting. I'm going to go way off topic, but I'll circle back on the topic. Hey, $35 a year right there. Well worth it. That's a good squeeze for the juice. I bought a 2019 3/4 ton 4-wheel drive diesel pickup in May of 2019. And I've had a couple of mechanical issues. The turbo went out, but I bought an extended warranty up to 120,000 miles. And it went out like at 83,000 miles. And the Chevy replaced it. And then, for crying out loud, I did one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I filled it up with gas. Thank goodness it didn't damage the engine. I was very fortunate. It cost me, I paid the dumb tax. You've heard me talk about that. Heck, I think one of you outlaws made fun of me for that, which I deserved it. Dave Weber did that. I deserved it. I was dumb. But that cost me $650 to get that fixed, which I was glad to pay that because it was just, and then I started getting little things like the exhaust filter would clog, and I could feel it shifting hard. Well, my son Taylor, stepson Taylor, he's my son. I call him my son because he and I are kind of that way. He works at El Dorado Chevrolet in McKinney. And Stan Graff owns that dealership. He's been one of my customers and friends for over 25 years. I've helped him with his ranch in East Texas. So I just called Taylor, said, hey, man, I need to bring this truck to the shop. Can I get a loaner? He said, yeah, we don't have any loaners, but I got a used vehicle I can put you in for 4 or 5 days while they fix the truck. So when I went into him, he said, you know, you only got another 30,000 miles and your warranty's up. Why don't you get another truck? I said, the last thing I want is a brand new truck with a brand new payment, etc. He said, no, it ain't that way. So I said, well, what's the way? And he got online, started looking at the Blue Book values, you know, NADA, whatever those guys do. And he says, you paid $58,500 for that truck. Your payoff is about $38,000 right now. We'll give you $55,000 trade-in for that truck. I said, you got to be kidding me. And so quickly in my mind, I'm thinking $3,500 to drive a truck 94,000 miles in this market. And I said, tell me more. Am I making a lateral move? He says, well, you're not going to be moving the RV anymore. You got it parked where you're going to be, so you don't need a 3/4 ton truck. You're not going to be pulling any heavy trailers or anything. He said, I've got a mid-range Z71. My current data plan has 20% left. Oh, great. So I don't know what that means. I just got a text that I've chewed up most of my free data on on my OnStar deal. So anyway, he said, I can put you in a 2021 4-wheel drive half-ton Z71 truck for 44 something, and not charge you the dealer premium because that's the family. Because right now the dealers are upcharging $5,000 above MSRP because that's their profit, because they don't have any inventory, you know. And if they didn't charge that, then the other dealers would go buy their trucks and mark them up $5,000 and sell them to somebody. So this car market's kind of crazy right now. So I said, okay, what does that mean financially? Because I've been paying like $950 a month on this truck since May of 2019. And so I ended up with that pickup at a $20,000 equity, which blew me away. I mean, I was owed $35,000 on it. So he said, well, we'll pay off that note, set you up in a new note at 1.9% interest because your credit rating is good. And your payment's going to drop $350 a month, and you get a brand new truck with 0 miles. I said, I don't want a loaner. Let's do that. Let's trade it. So now I've got a brand new 2021 truck with 428 miles on it already. So this car deal is kind of strange, and it never dawned on me ever. And now he told me when he sold me that truck that it would hold its value, and by golly, he was right. So got to take advantage of that. I see James Sewell. James, there's a Sewell dealership all over Texas. All right, so I see Harrison Davis. At least you didn't drive off with the gas pump running in the gas tank. Yeah, no, I didn't do that. I know somebody that did, but it wasn't me. So anyway, let's go back to fish behavior. Now, there was a really, really interesting lake. This had to be, oh my gosh, mid-90s. This is a long time ago. When I think back, it doesn't seem like a long time ago, but 25 years? It's a long time ago. Half a life. Well, these guys, the name of the club is Button Willow near Lone Oak, Arkansas. It's a hunting and fishing club. Duck hunters and anglers. They had a 100-acre lake, mostly shallow. And the herbicide bill was wearing them out. They could not keep up. They didn't want to keep spending that much money each year killing vegetation. And they were being picky about it because they wanted to leave certain areas for ducks and open up certain areas for fish. So as we got talking about it, I came up with the idea, let's, in the off season, drain the lake, get all the water out of it. Then let's just build a levee in one corner and take about 20 acres of that lake in the corner and just kind of, don't square it off, but just kind of an arching levee around it. And then let's take the middle of that 20 plus acres and make that into a great bass fishing lake. Create channels and humps and all the different bells and whistles, making an amusement park underwater for fish. And we did that. And so, and they could pump from a bayou right there. So they were able to fill up the whole thing. So they had 78 acres for duck hunting, and then they had their 20-plus acre lake. And they stocked it with bluegills, and then when they stocked it with bass, they were a little bit concerned because the bass they stocked were pretty good size, like 6 to 8 inches long, but they were a little bit worried that some of the bass got eaten, and they saw some of them float up dead. So they were real worried about how well their bass survived. So they made it. We went through the winter, and then the spring they started fishing, didn't catch any bass at all. So I was hopping through there, took my electrofishing boat, loaded it into the lake, unloaded it in the lake, and started riding around. Everywhere we went in that lake, bluegill were boiling up. It could be in water 25 feet deep, and we did this in April of that year. And those bluegill were everywhere. And I mean, most of the time they're holding tight to structure, close to the shore, etc. But in this case, they were all over the lake. And I'd pretty well memorized as we designed that lake where all the different channels and shallows and deep and all that stuff was going to be. There was not one spot on that lake we didn't shock up 3 to 5 inch bluegills. And that's when it began to dawn on me, that's not normal behavior. That was really strong evidence that there weren't any bass. If there were bass, the bluegill numbers would be lower, and they wouldn't be out in the middle of the lake, hovering 4 feet deep in 20 feet of water or 15 feet of water. So and of course, we didn't shock up any bass. So they had a 100% die-off of their, well, let me take that back. We shocked up 3 bass that looked like footballs. But in a lake that big, we should have shocked up 75 to 100 bass in the amount of time that we had the electrofishing boat going, the foot pedal engaged. So the fact that there weren't any bass in there, those bluegill sensed it. There was no threat, so they took advantage of every open niche that they could fill into. So the behavior of fish is going to be connected to the community they have to live in, what's chasing them, and what they're chasing. So those behaviors get to be pretty predictable. When the feeder goes off and fish boil the surface, and all of a sudden this giant swooping motion happens and you see an explosion because a 4-inch bluegill came up to eat your MVP and a big bass ate it, So that bass behavior, bluegill behavior, red ear behavior, it's all, some of that is based on that habitat and the dynamics of that fish population. So the more you understand that, the better angler you're going to be, and the more you're going to see the significance of the okay, so how far are we in? 45 minutes? Yeah, a little over. So I guess it runs for 45 minutes and it turns itself off. Interesting. Brandon Chancellor, good to see you. Chris Baker, good to see you. See Billy Bates, you got a question there. I'm going to get it. Something happened here. Drew Schmidt. Wayne is watching. Wayne must have parked. Okay. Wayne, I'm going to ring y'all here in a minute. I want to see how your house hunt's going. Because I got to drive back to the... we have a home here in Pecan Plantation, but we're staying in the hotel. I do need to do a commercial real quick. I talked about Palm Boss Magazine, $35 a year, but I do want to thank our sponsors. I got to hang out with David Schneiderman earlier this week at Easy Dock. He was at Heroes Ranch. You guys look up Heroes Ranch. I think it's heroesranch.org. Fantastic project where Freeman Sawyer, he's the guy I stole the term dumb tax from. He is building a ranch for wounded warriors to bring their families, have fellowship, and get to hunt and fish for free. And it's really, really fascinating to see his mission, and he's actually pulling it off. Some people talk about it, he's doing it. And I've been able to work with him for about 4 years now, helping him shop for the right ranch. My role is, can we have a lake? It's got to have a lake. Can it be a good lake? Can we build a lake? And I think I looked at probably 5 ranches with him over a 4-year span till he found the place he wanted between Quitman and Winsboro, Texas, and East Texas. David Schneiderman was there. David's going to help create a handicap-friendly dock where they can, I don't know that they're going to park jet skis, but they're going to fix it to where they've got some Pontini boats that Freeman learned about through Pond Boss. Pontini modified the boats to put wheelchair ramps on these small pontoon boats. Very cool. Go on his website and you can see some of this stuff. Anyway, got to see David, Easy Docks of Texas, one of our sponsors. I thank Purina Mills for sponsoring this. They work hard to create great fish foods and then do the best they can to get them out to the public. And Kenny Sanderson knows what I'm talking about there. And Texas Hunter Feeders. Now, of course, when I say Texas Hunter Feeders, I always think of my friend Chris Blood. And Chris is going to say, Bob, you need to promote your Institute of Higher Pondology. And I don't like talking about myself that much, but I like to follow Chris's advice because he's a good businessman and he helps be the backbone of Texas Hunter Feeders. And they've got great products, outstanding customer service. And Chris is going to want me to talk about the Institute of Higher Pondology. I think there's the Institute of Higher Pondology is a series of videos in 6 different modules. Each module has its own price. Or you can buy the whole thing bundled for $495. Now, that sounds high. It's not for what you get out of it. I promise. And then plus, you know, the email I got today, when I get a chance, I got to drive in the morning pretty early, but when I get to a stopping point, I'm going to answer those questions because he bought that Institute of Higher Pondology, and that's part of the deal. When you buy that, you get me. As long as I'm alive and I can type and I can think, I will respond to your questions. So you can find that at pondboss.com. There's a horizontal menu. One of those things is Institute. I think there's subscribe and then the store and videos and stuff. One of them says Institute. Or you can go to pondboss.teachable.com and it will take you right to it. All right, Billy Bates. Let's see here. 722. Let's see what we got here. One of my main winter goals is creating artificial spawning habitat for bluegill and bass. Have a pretty mucky bottom. What depths? What size pea gravel? And what kind of substrate should I use not to lose my gravel? Does being in full sun or shade matter? Great question. I love that question. Let's see. Brandon Chancellor, I think I said hello. Chris Baker, good to see you, buddy. James Allen, can you really put stripers in an 80-acre largemouth bass lake? Answer to that is yes, you can. You sure can. You can put hybrid stripers in there. Stripers are kind of hard to come by. Wade Gayer, Chuck Anzalone. All right, let me go back to that question back up here that Billy Bates is asking. You know, I tell you what I tell people. When the bottom of the pond is mucky, you need to find the flattest place you can. And before the water gets real cold, your water's pretty cold now, I bet. I think you need to get some geotextile cloth, anchor it on the bottom, and put about 4 inches of pea gravel. That pea gravel should be 3/8 to ½ an inch in diameter. If you can put it 4 inches thick, and if you can make a bed as big as a pickup truck and water 2 to 4 feet deep, fairly flat, that gravel won't go anywhere. It'll stay on top of that shade cloth or that geotextile cloth, landscape cloth. Just make sure it's porous so that it won't trap any air in it when you put it in the water. And when you anchor it and put that gravel on top of it, you can dump the gravel on it with a skid steer. You know, because it can be right fairly close to the shore. But it does need to be 3 feet deep. If you can get it 3 feet deep, at minimum of 2 feet deep, preferably 3 feet deep, maybe a little deeper. Deeper than a heron's feathers at the top of its legs. So it doesn't wade out there and eat all your fish. Does being in full sun or shade matter? You know, photo period's important, but I have never been able to outsmart fish that can't think. And what I've seen is sometimes that they would prefer sun. Other times, especially if there's something that wants to eat them, like a bird, then they prefer shade. Most of the time, what I see with spawning sunfish is they are on the downwind side where the waves lap, hit, turn under. They're spawning right there. So if the predominant winds are out of the southwest, the northeast side's a better place. However, I can't convince the fish that I'm right. So I like to have diversity. You know, if they've got 5 choices, then you'll see which ones they like the best, and you can replicate that. So that's going to be my answer for that one. 7:25. This hour's flown by. I'm going to go back to James Allen. James, in an 80-acre largemouth bass lake, here's the way to answer that question. Does that lake have habitat for hybrid stripers? Hybrid stripers prefer to eat shad in open water and move a lot. Hybrid stripers have got that vein of red meat along its lateral line. That thing allows it to exchange heat. And so because of that, the more they move, the warmer they can stay in, cooler water. And that's part of the reason they're cooler water fish. So the answer is, yes, you can put hybrid stripers in an 80-acre lake. Now, how many would you put? 5 to the acre, 6 to the acre, something like that. And the number you put is contingent on the food chain to support them, what percentage of that lake is void of largemouth bass structure and cover, because they're going to basically live in two different niches, except when the hybrid stripers start running out of food, then they're going to come to the shore. They're going to eat whatever they can get. And now, good thing about it is they'll eat fish food. Now if you only stock 3 or 4 or 5 per acre, 10 per acre, something like, I'm going to say 3, 4, 5, 6 per acre in an 80-acre lake, the odds are not as high of them coming to the fish food, to the fish feeder, but they will. So, yes, you can. And some of that is also hinging on water quality. The better quality water you have, the better survival rates you're going to have of hybrid stripers. I would not put them in an acid water North Carolina lake. I wouldn't put them in there. If the pH is 5.3 to 5.8, odds are high that they won't thrive in that. So, there you go. That's the way I see that. Chuck Bass and Bluegill still feeding good. Now, he's in Missouri, kind of west of St. Louis. Does the water temperature come into play much with the pond's ability to maintain the water quality? That's a good question. Does water temperature come into play much? Yeah, it does. It does. Because what happens when the water temperature begins to drop, its ability to metabolize organic waste plummets. But so does what's living in the water. So your zooplankton, phytoplankton, things like that are going to die back in colder water. So you're going to have a little bit less oxygen demand depending on how dense your bloom was. So if you had a bloom and the water temperature is falling and it dies, it's going to want to decompose. And the water temperature is going to slow down. So I'm going to slow down that whole process. So that's part of the reason that people in the north choose not to feed the fish, because they don't want to deal with their water quality issues as it gets cooler, because then they're going to be capped with ice. Ice doesn't always form clear, and sunlight's what it takes to help make these processes really kick in and go. So that's the answer to that one, the best of my ability. Tony Sutton, Richard Jones, Drew Schmidt. I've been making all sorts of artificial habitats and been strategizing on placement. What percentage of deep water structure, 8 to 12 feet, do you recommend? I recommend putting all of it in water 8 feet deep and less. Now, if you want to do some ice fishing or wintertime fishing, I would put some in 12 feet, but I would have it extend up to where it's maybe 5 feet under the surface. So you need something 6 feet tall to put in 12 feet of water. And if you do that, think communities. As you're building this artificial habitat, if it's 5 feet tall, put some of that in 12 feet of water, but bundle it, clump it together. Don't just put one here, one there, one there, one there. It won't attract fish. But if you've got 10 of them and you put those 10 in an area that's as big as a pickup pulling a trailer, then you're going to have the area that you need. All right, guys, James Allen, we're working with the state to help manage the watershed, specifically the silt coming into the lake from the 1.6 square mile watershed. It's a 50-year-old lake. Methods to manage silt, something you consult on. I do. If you want to call me, let's have a conversation. Send me an email with your phone number, and I'll ring you tomorrow as I drive. Just send it to boblusk@outlook.com, and I'll talk to you about it. Because managing silt, there's not an easy way or a cheap way to manage silt. The best way to manage silt is to prevent it from coming into the lake. So we'll talk about that. Harrison Davis, the largemouth bass use shells or stones in their beds. If not, why is that so? If that's their only choice, they will. Now, largemouth bass would prefer to build their nest in gravel. That's what they'd rather do. But I've seen them build them in sand. I've actually shocked bass off of a big stump before, But they don't particularly care about shells because shells will cut them up. But stones, not so much. And that's one reason I also avoid crushed rock for spawning beds, especially for bluegills. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. Hey, thanks for hanging out tonight. Thanks to the sponsors. And I always appreciate your questions and your participation. So I'm not sure where I'll be next week because I'm still homeless. It's okay, though. It's working out. So I will see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks again for joining in. Adios.